Hello and welcome to another episode of the Empowered Hormones podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today for episode 159. And today we're chatting about something really relevant, I feel like. Sometimes I do podcast episodes that are more about sexual health or mental health or training or exercise, antioxidants, food, diets, all those kinds of things. But today I wanted to chat about what exactly is a root cause, and then also what are some of the main root causes when it comes to, I'm using air quotes here, obviously you guys can't see that, but when it comes to diagnosing IBS, because so many women get told they have IBS when they go to their GP, which basically stands for irritable bowel syndrome. I've done other podcast episodes on this topic, which I really encourage you to go back and listen to, or listen to some of the episodes on why IBS is a BS diagnosis, and also around stool testing and those kinds of things. But we'll cover that a little bit today. But really, I want to explain what exactly is a root cause and why it's so important for IBS, and then the top 5 root causes of IBS that your doctor probably isn't testing for. Because this is the thing, right? So many women get told that they have IBS, but their doctor is only diagnosing it off their symptoms. So they're diagnosing it off the fact that you have, let's say, constipation dominant IBS, or loose stools, or so that's what we call IBS-C for constipation, IBS-D for diarrhea, or IBS-M, so just a mix of constipation, loose stools, which is primarily what I see come through the clinic, is a mix of constipation and loose stools. But if I was going to say one's more dominant than the other, the constipation aspect is probably more dominant than the loose stools aspect. So there is likely 5 contributing factors that give you IBS. And when we're talking about a root cause approach, we're looking deeper than just like your doctor say, it's genetic, you're not drinking enough water, you're not moving every day, you're not eating enough fiber. Those are real sort of shallow, top level things that contribute to IBS. Yes, they could be a cause if, for example, you aren't eating enough fiber, you're not eating any fruits or vegetables, then I am going to expect that you're going to be a little bit constipated. Or if you're not drinking enough water, I expect constipation. But if you are doing those basics, eating well, exercising, drinking your water, eating enough fiber, working on stress reduction, like if you're highly stressed all the time, then yes, that is going to play into it. But if there's stress reduction aspects and you're still having these symptoms, then you want to look a bit deeper. And that's what we call a root cause approach. We're really understanding why you have these symptoms. And this is what I do over 6 months with women inside my root cause program. We actually pull apart what are all these underlying factors that are contributing to their symptoms, run in-depth testing. And this is really where my program is so different to the way so many other naturopaths and nutritionists work, is I run the comprehensive testing that women need that their GPs don't run. Because when women are coming to me, by that point, they've spent a couple thousand, they're frustrated, they've tried a lot of supplements, they've tried a lot of diets, they've tried the medical approach, and they don't have any answers. So they're at the end of their line going, now what? Like, I've done all these things, now what? Where do I go next? And that's where I go, hey, we want to run some comprehensive stool testing, some SIBO breath testing, some Dutch hormone testing, some hair and mineral analysis, some functional bloods, and actually understand why your body isn't happy, because usually it is deeper than just your diet and exercise. But the women I work with classically are going to the gym, are doing the exercise, are eating pretty healthy, and are still either not seeing results from the hard work they're putting in, cortisol and gut imbalances, which is blocking that muscle growth and you being able to shed excess weight. And also they're just not feeling like themselves. They're feeling fatigued. And I had a female post in the group yesterday, because we have a private Facebook group which gets filled with questions on bloating, thrush, constipation, loose stools, those kinds of things. And she said, even my husband now noticed and said, hey, you're starting to be more like yourself. Which I'm like, when other people notice it and notice the shift in you, then quote unquote, you're doing something good, right? Because you get attuned to the symptoms you're struggling with every day, and it's really hard. Skin is a classic one. Like, you don't see the shifts in your skin until you say you go back to your therapist, like 2 or 3 weeks later after doing your peel or doing whatever it is, following their skin treatment plan, and then they're like, hey, look at this before and after. You're like, oh wow, my skin's actually progressed. Or you see someone who hasn't seen you in ages and they're like, hey, you've put on a bit of muscle. Or hey, your hair's grown back and it's thick and long. Those little things that you don't notice day to day, people around you tend to notice, and that's when we see those big shifts. So the 5 root causes of IBS, or gut imbalances, or poor gut health is 1, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth; 2, dysbiosis of the gut microbiome; 3, intestinal hyperpermeability, aka leaky gut; 4, gut infections, so parasites, bacteria, yeast; and 5, main one, which is quite an interesting one, is food sensitivities, malabsorption, or enzyme deficiencies, which lead to things like lactose or fructose malabsorption. So these are the 5 main areas, and your GP will not test for these things. I've never seen a GP test for any of this stuff before. So your GP's stool test is very basic, so it just looks up a couple parasites and a couple bacteria, whereas the one I run in clinic, you do over 3 days generally, and it picks up a host of immune markers, inflammatory markers, bacteria, yeast, digestive markers, leaky gut lining, liver detoxification, all those kinds of things, which give us a real clear picture as to why you have this dysbiosis in the first place. So dysbiosis means imbalance of good to bad. So the first one here is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, or as you would see me refer to, SIBO. So this basically is characterized by an increased number or abnormal type of bacteria in the small intestine. So basically, these bacteria generally live in the large intestine, but we're seeing them represent in the small intestine. So there's 2 main types, hydrogen and methane. So they both typically result in bloating, as well as they can then go into more diarrhea dominant or constipation dominant, or obviously that alternating, I have my words there, or flicking between, alternating is the word I was going for, constipation or loose stools. Okay, so that's why 85% of those diagnosed with IBS actually have SIBO. So you do want to identify whether it's hydrogen or methane dominant, just because these are treated differently. So they actually respond to different herbs. Typically, I'll see those with hydrogen bacteria having more of the loose stools, and then those with methane having more of the constipation. They act a little bit differently in the gut. They have the way they feed off foods is a little bit different, but I do have podcasts breaking down like more in-depth SIBO stuff if you want to go back and nerd out on SIBO. But basically, the most common symptoms of the various SIBO types, many which overlap with those of IBS, is bloating within an hour after meals, chronic diarrhea or constipation or alternating constipation and diarrhea, burping or reflux after meals, foul-smelling gas, and stomach gurgling, discomfort or cramping. That's sort of our main SIBO ones, which you can understand how that sounds exactly like IBS as well, because that's what your doctor's saying. They're like, well, your bowel is irritable. It is not happy, and that's why it's giving you those symptoms. So SIBO is a breath test that you conduct at home. I authorize it from the labs for my clients. It gets sent to their house. They complete it at home and send it back off to the labs. We get the results, and then from there, you're sort of looking anywhere from a 6 to 12 week treatment of the bacteria, depending what bacteria it is, how overgrown it is, and what the surrounding factors around it is. So why do you have SIBO in the first place? Root cause number 2, dysbiosis of the gut microbiome. So basically, our gut has a complex community over 100 trillion microorganisms, and these influence a lot of different areas of the body. So we call that our microbiome. Now, when we see more what we call bad bacteria, to keep it simple, as opposed to good gut flora, we then start to see these symptoms. So often this is from birth control, antibiotics, medications, and what they do is they damage the diversity and the number of the beneficial bacteria, which leads to a gradual onset of IBS type symptoms. So this is rather than just a particularly bad bug. You don't actually have a parasite, and I see this really commonly. Yes, I see large gut infections come through, but I do also see a lot of people with just an undergrown microbiome leading to their symptoms. So you need to go through a rebuild, repair, regenerate stage, and also depending on the damage to the gut lining from this, because the good bacteria are what actually protect that cell wall. So we need to keep that protected with a nice mucosal layer on there, because when that hits the cells, we start to see damage and we start to see inflammation. And that kind of leads into the root cause number 3, intestinal hyperpermeability. So basically leaky gut. So where those cells should sit shoulder to shoulder, that's actually quite the mouth twister, they separate. So as things hit the cell walls, they get angry, rather than, like I said, having that beneficial bacteria layer on there. The gluten, parasites, toxins, medications, they're all damaging that. They're hitting the cell walls. They're getting angry, moving apart from each other, and things are going through them into your bloodstream. So they actually act like the fence, separating the inside of your intestines and your bloodstream. Their role is to control what is allowed access into your bloodstream, such as nutrients, and what is not allowed in, like pathogens, toxins, and undigested food particles, okay? So when we have this leaky gut, these doors open, these things that normally don't go through, they flow into your bloodstream, making your immune system wake up and start fighting. This is called an inflammatory immune response and causes a lot of GI symptoms. So as we work on healing and rebuilding that gut lining, I see a huge difference in the amount of food tolerated, the number of bowel movements someone having. So we reset to that normal 1 to 3 bowel movements per day, as opposed to way too many and really loose. And you kind of go back to where you want to be sitting on the Bristol stool chart. Number 4 is gut infections. So when we talk about gut infections, I'm referring to infections anywhere from the stomach right through to the small intestine and the colon. So the most common types I see in clinic is the Blastocystis hominis parasite, and there's also the Dientomobia fragilis parasite. So I call that one defrag or blasto are the main 2. I do see other parasites come up, but like I said, these are the most common ones that come through. And then bacteria, there's the Helicobacter pylori, which a lot of people have had in the past and have used antibiotics on. Klebsiella I see quite commonly, and Clostridium I see quite commonly, and sometimes Citrobacter and Campylobacter. So they are some of the bacteria that we need to treat and remove from the large intestine so that we can start our rebuild or repair focus. And then as far as fungi and yeast, there are a few different types I see come through clinic, but the most common one is your Candida, which most people know about. So when we're looking at this stuff, we go, okay, people go, well, where did they come from? Like, how did I pick this up? Now, overseas, food poisoning, pets, or even sometimes an outbreak in your town's water supply, or very commonly rainwater, is where people get contaminated with these things. So if your immune system isn't strong enough to fight them off and to keep them at bay, because remember, we don't have enough good gut flora because we're stressed, or we drink too much alcohol, or we're tired, or we're food sensitivities, all these things that compromise our immune system, that's when we pick up these bugs, and then that's what give us these IBS symptoms. Also, we're thinking about things like Candida. Antibiotics use is a huge one for them. So if someone does have Candida or yeast infection, I do think about how much have they used antibiotics in the past. So doing the 3-day stool testing, so I use the GI 360, which I have a really great YouTube video where I share screen and explain that to you guys, or episode it's like 157, I think. I go through and sort of explain the key markers in that test. That is one that I love using to diagnose whether your diarrhea, your constipation, your gas and bloating, your reflux and heartburn, so especially things like H. pylori, which impact your stomach acid production, will show up on your stool test as well. If you have stuck on a low FODMAP diet for like a really long time, so I think of most people sort of go, if they're sort of going over that 3 to 4 months on that really strict diet, then I start to go, okay, why are we not reintroducing foods? What's going on here? And then also secondary symptoms, fatigue, hormone imbalances, weight gain, insomnia, anxiety, malabsorption. All of these can be from having a gut infection. Okay, so there's quite a few sort of signs and symptoms, and you'll understand this now from all these root causes. So the SIBO, the dysbiosis, the leaky gut, the gut infection, a lot of these are having similar symptoms, right? So if you're not testing, if someone comes to me and goes, oh, I'm constipated and bloated, help me. I'm like, well, cool, but why? Like, is it SIBO? Is it leaky gut? Is it a gut infection? And if I'm just going in there blindly throwing herbs willy-nilly around at you, all I'm going to do is cause more damage and havoc. Yes, there's things that are protective and won't cause damage, like Saccharomyces boulardii are pretty easy to tolerate. Spore, yeast-based probiotic, which is not generally going to cause any harm, right? So yeah, you could go ahead and use that, but you're not treating the infection, and you don't want to use herbs unless you know what actually is going on in the gut there. And then lastly, food sensitivities. So you actually see a lot of food sensitivities in those with IBS simply because they don't have a lot of the bacteria to break these things down. So gluten, dairy, eggs, nuts, those kinds of things, or high FODMAP foods are generally not very well tolerated in those early stages. And I see this classically within the first 1 to 3, 4 months of the root cause program. And then in sort of that 4 to 6 months, we start adding a lot more foods in and people are tolerating them fine. But you do get true allergies, so an IgE mediated immune response, or more mild intolerances, so an IgG mediated immune response. And then, like I said earlier, sometimes it's enzyme deficiencies, which can lead to things like lactose or fructose malabsorption. So I do think they are linked into the IBS picture, but I've definitely found that while they're contributing and while removing these things can be really helpful and supportive by adding in the enzymes, removing foods that you're reacting to, it's not always a root cause approach unless it's actually an allergy, and generally it's more of just an imbalance in the bacteria and inflammation in the gut. So sometimes it's a combination, but usually it's just that you're deficient in zinc, B12, so there's nutrient deficiencies that's stopping your digestive factors, where probably your stomach acid and things, and then there's usually also an imbalance in dietary intake of bitter things that are going to help stimulate bile production. You might have a liver that's not super stoked with you, you're not producing a lot of bile salts, you might need some iberogast or some Taduca to actually get this whole process of digestion and fats and things breaking down properly. Or like I said, there's actually gut infections that we need to treat, rebuild, repair that gut, and then you can tolerate those foods again. So I most commonly find that it is a mix of these 5 root causes. So for example, someone can have, say, like I had methane dominant SIBO, and then I had very low Bifidobacterium and Lactobacillus species, but I also had I had 2 parasites and quite a few overgrown inflammatory bacteria, plus Candida and yeast, and I was also reacting to gluten-containing grains. So I had quite a lot of different things going on in my gut, which is why when I tested and I was like, yes, there's a whole heap going on here, but now I can set a clear plan, treat this, treat that, rebuild, repair, add the foods back in, and now I'm symptom-free. But if I didn't know that and I spent 10 years not knowing that, then I'm guessing and I'm throwing different things. And I had no one say to me, and I went to functional GPs as well, and no one said to me, hey, you should do a comprehensive stool test and this is how it's going to work. The process was murky, it was unclear. I didn't have clarity, I didn't have support, I felt confused, I felt overwhelmed, I felt frustrated. And on top of that, I was tired, I was bloated, my body was cracking it at me, and I didn't know where to go next. And that's why I built the root cause program, so that people aren't walking around with these IBS symptoms going, I don't know what to do, I don't have a root cause for it. So I highly encourage you to get testing done with a health practitioner and then break down and have a clear plan. And I do find minimum 6 months, which is why I don't do random one-off consults anymore, because I want to see people heal. I want you to get the results, and I want to see you heal, and I want to see you walk away symptom free. And that's why you need that extended time frame to do those kinds of things. So if that's something that interests you, I will put the link in the bio for my free gut health chat. So if you ever want to get some one-on-one help, we can jump on a Zoom call for a quick chat and brainstorm ways of how to overcome your bloating, fatigue, heal your hormones, all without guessing, all with a clear plan, all with clarity. Please drop me a message on Instagram if you enjoyed this podcast or you want to know more about testing. I have some great episodes you will love. I do love hearing from you guys. Please share the podcast episode if you found it helpful. It helps me empower and educate more women.